Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep, that's good. Push the button.
Okay,
Yep.
good. Yeah, so I was talking about risk being one of the defining factors of our environment at the moment. Okay, but we very, very rarely get the chance to actually sit down and learn. And these are some of the points I think David was talking about there. And the whole idea of the community, and this is why we've created this, because it is a learning community for everybody involved, and we're all learning all the time. We feedback, we can network. We have a multi-sectoral platform here of risk professionals, okay, all who want to have a part in this process. So again, just echoing some of the words that David said, and then just following on very, very quickly. I think I'd like to now sort of touch on our youth, and so I want to introduce right now one of our brightest young professionals here, Maxim Zebratov. Okay, Maxim's the coordinator of the US-Ukraine Partnership Program at Transatlantic Dialogue Center. He oversees research policy initiatives focused on transatlantic security cooperation, democratic resilience, and Ukraine's strategic role in evolving global order. Okay, he's been published, and I think he is a bright star for the future. Everyone, please just put your hands together for Maxim. He's got it.
So greetings to everyone. My name is Maxim Zolotovorits'kyi, and I'm just mentioned US-Ukraine Partnership Program Coordinator at PDC. PDC is the Ukrainian non-partisan, non-governmental think tank, and we do a lot of advocacy visits. Louder?
Louder. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And we do a lot of advocacy visits abroad, and kind of one of the most notable just in the recent times was that during the Ankara summit, we have hosted a side event together with Helsinki Group, and our European Partnership Program was very active about that. And today I would be happy to address kind of a sensitive topic, but my goal is to bring some visions, ideas, and I would be happy to discuss with you. Just in case this session does not have the Q&A session, but afterwards I would be happy to engage with all of you. So the topic for today is Ukraine security outlook, risks, trends, and the operating environment. And before I was diving into the topic, I was really wondering how to address and how to nail the topic accordingly. And the best idea was from my colleagues and our environment within the governmental circles, but still the concept was that the best way to address the security environment is through Ukraine's strategic security environment perspective. By that, I mean a set of military, political, economic, technological, diplomatic, and social conditions that shape Ukraine's ability to defend itself and to deter Russia and to improve its position globally. So kind of whereas the frontline dynamic remains central to Ukraine's security, it's only a part of the broader picture that includes also Russia's missile and drone strikes towards Ukraine during the night, campaigns against cities and infrastructure, basically critical infrastructure. And this, but also it's also important to incorporate the discourse about the sustainability of Ukraine's society and Ukraine's political situation, Ukraine's financial situation, and the resilience that we all can bring together. But the definition of Ukraine's strategic security environment does matter, especially in 2026, because the war in Ukraine, from our perspective, can no longer be considered as a war of attrition focused on Ukraine, but it is rather a contest between the two models of adaptation. So from the one side, Russia is trying to compensate for poor force quality through mass. It's basically manpower, missile and drone terror, coercive diplomacy, political blackmail, pressure along the front line. But on the other side, Ukraine is compensating for resource constraints through speed and adaptation. We have rapid technological innovation. We have accelerated defense production. We have coalitions building approaches, and we do so. And we also employ asymmetric warfare tactics. First, one-to-one, and a big Soviet, small Soviet, it was impossible, so Ukraine transformed, and now we are entering asymmetric warfare. But the paradox, as of July 2026, is that Russia can still inflict pain, but it's increasingly struggling to convert that pain into strategic success. Meanwhile, Ukraine's overall goal can be described in three pillars: I emphasize that this framing is not the official policy language of Ukraine's senior leadership, but rather our impression how they understand Ukraine's strategic security landscape. So first, strategic goals for Ukraine can be framed as to deny Russia's ability to make further advancements. So only when the Russian leadership concludes that additional offensives will carry unacceptable costs, will it be forced to powerfully reassess. It was the first. Second, to break Moscow's assumption of Ukrainian exhaustion. So basically, the Kremlin continues to assess that US disengagement and doubts about the European commitment and partner nations' ability to support Ukraine would collapse, actually. And the third is to force a cost-benefit shift in the Kremlin's calculus. So basically, negotiations, in this sense, become viable only when the cost of continued war outweighs the benefit of continued occupation. So these are the key strategic pillars. A separate note that Russia, in this sense, if you're successful in achieving these particular goals, Russia that is bleeding militarily, isolated diplomatically, and focus and facing a strong Ukrainian military is far more likely to see in serious terms, to seek serious terms on negotiation formats. And it's actually true because a set of diplomatic engagements launched quite some time ago, and we have a positive dynamic in this regard. So I'm very optimistic about it. But it's also important to know that for Ukraine to sustain this momentum, and given the geopolitical environment we are living in, and we all see the current news, the recent news, kind of expectations from our partners, we also have to make a couple of steps. So basically, it's vital for us to demonstrate victories in many ways. We do have to demonstrate victories in rapid technological innovation, in mutually beneficial commercial offers, in strikes towards Russia key economic assets, and potentially in retaking some portions of occupied territories. And I would say that the last point is one of those that was a part of this discussion during the Avian Summit. So given all of these points, these are exceptionally difficult tasks, but they are all necessary to preserve the Avian spirit following the G7 summit in France, but also the Ankara summit with pretty positive meetings and pretty positive outcomes from that, and to force Russia to enter substantive negotiations. And for that, I have a set of considerations. I will try to be as fast as possible in this regard, but still it's just to feed the discourse and provide you some ideas and perspectives. And do not pretend to be absolutely accurate in this consideration, but still. So first, Russia's diplomacy as an instrument of pressure, and they continue to employ it as a pressure. Kremlin presents itself as open to diplomacy, but in fact, in public speech and in private conversations, their position remains in many ways maximalist. And its diplomatic messaging is designed to legitimize territorial gains, weaken Western support for Ukraine, create pressure for its ceasefire on Russian terms, present Ukraine as an obstacle to peace, and gain time for military adaptation. And just let me remind you that as long as Ukraine is pretty successful in employing the previous three pillars with supplemental tasks, the discourse in Russia started to change and starting to shift in a more positive way. So it's very important when we are entering into negotiations to ask ourselves, is this a real offer to end the war that Russia presents to us? Or is it just another way to continue the war by political means, or other means, or just to pause it and to reassess and to fight again? Second point in this regard, Putin's diplomacy. Putin's Asia diplomacy helps Russia avoid isolation, and they do possess it. We have partners in other countries, and we can engage with them, and it allows Moscow to to show that it does still have some political benefit, but it is increasingly struggling to convert these kind of engagements into pressure campaigns that would force Ukraine into capitulation or to force Ukraine to enter into serious talks just per se. And just a couple of highlights, because they are emerging from time to time in debates, and we are entering these structural debates, and especially on the US Pentagon side, it was very well received. because in terms of the Russia's casualty rate, it's a matter of true that in Q1 2026, Russia's casualty rate exceeded 27,000. So basically, the mobilization rate, and it's now, and by Q1 it was roughly up to 30,000. Now it's slightly less because they slightly slowed the advances, but all in all, the number is like that. And also notable about this casualty rate, because in the previous phases of the war, the casualty rate was 2-1, 3-1 in Ukraine's favor. Now in Q1 2026, it was 8-1. So we did show the positive results in this regard. And the rate of advances on the Russia side is 50 meters per day near Konstantinikov, 70 meters per day near Pokrovsk, 90 meters per day near Slavyansk. So Russia is paying thousands of casualties to move forward at the speed of a person crossing a football field just within one day. My second argument, so first argument was that Russia uses diplomacy as an instrument of pressure. My second argument is that Ukraine's financial situation is actually not a vulnerability, but a signal of strategic confidence in Ukraine and a source of leverage for our partners. So indeed, we have problems with the economy. For example, 19.3% of GDP is our fiscal deficit for this year. But in the meantime, our partners has committed to us more than 110 billion euros for the upcoming two years, which in fact is actually a bit quite more than this number. So it basically signals that the partners do not see Ukraine at a sunk cost and investments in Ukraine at a sunk cost, but they see a country whose war trajectory, institutional resilience, and defense potential remain worth backing. For example, G7 era loans and Ukraine received more than 37.8 billion euros proceeds from the Russian frozen assets. And it's actually important because we already utilized this and the discussion continues. I hope for an optimism, but kind of it's complicated right now. Whereas Russia, kind of no speculation here, but the cost of the war of Russia is more and more visible, and there are many indications for that. So, for example, the federal budget deficit in Russia reached 6 trillion rubles, which is more than $83 billion. It's first argument. Second, this number is 1.6 times their full year target for a recorded year. So it's more than was expected by 1.6 times. Next, Russia's spending exceeds revenues by roughly 50% in Q1 this year. Russia has also to draw finances from its national wealth funds to cover oil and gas deficits. Next, liquid sovereign wealth fund assets reportedly fell from 6.5% GDP in 2022, and right now it's 1.8% of GDP. And last, oil and gas revenues fell by around 42-45% in 2026. So just tightening the fiscal squeeze in Russia. So Russia is not a good shape from economical perspective. They are holding, but the situation gets worse and worse. And my last argument would be that Ukraine's strike campaign moved beyond the front line, and we all see these mid-strike, deep strike drones, and they does have an impact. So when it comes to mid-strike drones, Ukraine's strategy, it does appear to cut Russia's logistics to Crimea. And Crimea it's vital to talk about the Crimea because for some, they may consider Crimea is some kind of a symbol for Russians. It's true, especially for Putin. It's a symbol. But in the meantime, it's a logistical corridor for Russia to supply its troops on the southern axis of Ukraine. And just kind of within the last couple of months, starting from April, in May, in June, Ukraine targeted Krasnogvardeysk Canal in Crimea, fuel and lubricant depots, Russian EV sites, airfields, and many other things. And also quite notable, and just kind of today I was spoken to the naval forces of Ukraine, and a great job, 116 Russian vessels were damaged or destroyed by Ukraine just within 1 week. Oil tankers, patrol ships, and just today the FSB ship, FSB vessel was sunk because of Ukraine's strike with unmanned surface vehicle. And the deep strike, it's quite more interesting because Ukraine is indeed demonstrating a growing ability to conduct deep strikes targeting key economic assets. So, for example, out of most recent is Moscow refinery, Topse, Armavir, Yaroslavl, Volgograd, facilities near St. Petersburg, I mean, oil depots. Out of most notable was the Omsk refinery in Siberia, which is 2.7 thousand kilometers away from Ukraine, with Ukraine kind of reportedly gaining the ability to strike targets far beyond the 3,000 and maybe even more than 3.5 thousand kilometers away from Ukraine. It's a significant development. It's significant development. Moreover, most of these deep strike drones are now being produced absolutely domestically, with certain components from outside, but still, the most part of them are produced domestically. And kind of the result of such attacks, yes, we see consequences in Ukraine in terms of AZS and Ukrainian oil refineries also closer to the east, but the impact on Russia was significant. Basically, in June 2026, the proceeds from the oil fell. The proceeds of the capacity to produce oil fell by roughly 25% year to year, which is 3.95 million barrels per day, and this number of crude processing is the lowest ever in more than 2 decades in Russian history. And Ukraine continues. So let me just finalize why I was so focused on Ukraine-Russia conflict and in this regard, because from a strategic risk management perspective, and basically things we are trying to discuss here, create ideas to shape visions. So you can agree with me, you may disagree with me, but anyway, but it's to shape the perspective. And the Ukraine security environment should be understood not as a static attrition problem, but as a dynamic contest. It is about Ukraine not just reacting to risk, but also trying to change who carries the risk. And in our case, Russia should bear the maximum risk for this war. Whereas Russia's approach is to keep raising pressure until Ukraine or its partners accept Moscow's terms, Ukraine's approach is different, and it's mostly focused to absorb the pressure, adapt basically, and make Russia's next offensive, next missile campaign, next political gamble, next irritation signal because one president didn't have a phone call with other president, more costly than the last one. And only approaching this strategy and together with our partners and having windows of opportunities to engage with Russia, we can discuss peaceful resolution or peace settlement in Ukraine. Thank you.